I first noticed him at the grocery store on Tuesday morning. He was bagging my items with hands that looked like they'd been soaking in bleach for weeks. The skin was paper thin, stretched tight over knuckles that jutted out like small mountains. His eyes were the color of old pennies, and when he looked at me, I felt like he was counting something behind those pupils. "Have a blessed day," he said, and his voice sounded like gravel being stirred in a bucket. I took my bags and left quickly, but something about his smile stayed with me. It was too wide, showing too many teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. The next day, I went to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription. The same old man stood behind the counter wearing the same faded uniform shirt, the same crooked name tag that read HAROLD. His hands moved with practiced ease as he counted out my pills. Those same bleached hands, those same penny-colored eyes. "Harold?" I said, reading his name tag. "Didn't you work at Peterson's Market yesterday?" He looked up at me with that unsettling smile. "I work wherever I'm needed, young man." The way he said "young man" made my stomach twist. I was 32 years old, but he said it like I was a child. He was scolding. I paid for my medication and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. How could the same person work at two different places? Maybe he had twin jobs, or maybe I was just seeing things. People can look similar, right? But deep down, I knew it was the same person. On Thursday, I needed to get my car's oil changed. The mechanic shop was on the other side of town, a place I'd never been before. I pulled into the garage and waited for someone to help me. Harold walked out from under the hood of a sedan, wiping his hands on a rag. Same pale skin, same sharp smile, same penny eyes. "What can I do for you today?" he asked, like we'd never met before. His voice was still that gravelly whisper, but now it had an oily quality to it. I stared at him, trying to process what I was seeing. The garage smelled like motor oil and rubber, but underneath that was something else, something sweet and sickly. You work here too?" I stammered. Harold tilted his head like a confused dog. "I've worked here for 15 years, son. Is there something wrong with your vehicle?" His name tag now read Howard, and his uniform was covered in grease stains that looked fresh but somehow artificial. I told him about the oil change, but I kept staring at his face. It was definitely him. The same deep lines around his eyes, the same way his mouth curved when he smiled. But his uniform was different, and he moved around the garage like he'd been working there his entire life. He knew where every tool was, every part, every fluid. The oil change took 20 minutes. The whole time, I watched him work through the window. His movements were too smooth, too practiced. He never seemed to get tired or take a break. When he finished, he came back inside and handed me the receipt. His fingers were cold when they brushed against mine. "Drive safe now," he said. "Roads can be dangerous this time of year." It was the middle of summer and I had no idea what he meant by that, but the way he said it made me want to check my rearview mirror all the way home. There was something prophetic about his words, like he knew something I didn't. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to where I shopped. I began keeping a mental list of every place I saw Harold, or Howard, or whatever his name really was. The pizza place downtown. He worked the register, knew everyone's usual order. The hardware store. He helped customers in the plumbing section, could identify any bolt or screw by touch. The dry cleaner. He stood behind the counter, pressing clothes with those thin, pale hands. Each time he wore a different uniform. Each time his name tag showed a different name that always started with H. Henry, Herbert, Hugo, Hamilton. But it was always the same face, always the same unsettling smile. And he always acted like he'd never seen me before, even though I was becoming a regular customer at every store in town. I started asking other customers about him. "Oh, you mean old Harry?" said a woman at the coffee shop. "He's been working here since before I moved to town. Sweet old man, very helpful." She stirred her coffee with a plastic spoon, oblivious to the wrongness of the situation. At the bookstore, a teenager told me about Hank, who knew where every title was located. At the gas station, the manager praised Hugh for his reliability and punctuality. Everyone spoke about him like he was a different person, like there were 7 or 8 different old men who all happened to look identical and work at every business in town. But I knew better. I knew it was the same person, somehow managing to be everywhere at once. The question was how, and more importantly, why. The town wasn't that big, maybe 15,000 people with about 40 or 50 businesses scattered throughout. But somehow Harold was working at all of them. I started mapping out his appearances, trying to figure out his schedule. Gas station on Monday mornings, grocery store on Tuesday, pharmacy on Wednesday, mechanic shop on Thursday, but the pattern didn't hold up under scrutiny. Then I realized he wasn't following a schedule at all. He was just everywhere. I saw him at the grocery store on Monday afternoon, then at the coffee shop an hour later. Same day, same time, different locations. It was impossible unless he had a twin brother, or triplets, or octuplets. But even then, the resemblance was too perfect, too exact. I decided to test my theory. On a Saturday morning, I drove to the hardware store first. Harold was there wearing a green apron and helping a customer pick out screws. His hands moved with practiced ease, sorting through bins of hardware like he'd been doing it for decades. I bought a pack of batteries and left immediately. Then I drove across town to the electronics store, a 10-minute drive at least. Harold was there too, standing behind the customer service desk. Same face, same pale hands, same penny-colored eyes. But now he wore a blue shirt with a different name tag, Harris. There was no way he could have gotten from one store to the other in 10 minutes, especially not while changing clothes. The electronics store was on the complete opposite side of town, and traffic was heavy that morning. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, smiling that too wide smile. I stammered something about browsing and backed away. His eyes followed me as I walked through the store, pretending to look at televisions and computers. When I glanced back, he was still watching me, still smiling. Other customers moved around us, completely oblivious to the impossibility of the situation. I left the electronics store and drove straight to the pizza place. Harold was there too, tossing dough behind the counter. This time his name tag read Harvey. 3 different locations, 3 different uniforms, 3 different names, all within 30 minutes. His movements were fluid and practiced like he'd been making pizzas for years, just like he'd been fixing cars and selling electronics. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those penny-colored eyes, the way they seemed to follow me wherever I went. I started wondering if other people had noticed what I was seeing. Maybe everyone just accepted it as normal, like the way people accept that the mail comes every day or that the seasons change. But this was different. This was wrong. I tossed and turned in my bed, replaying every interaction I'd had with Harold. The way he never seemed surprised to see me, even though I was showing up at multiple locations throughout the day. The way he always knew exactly what I needed before I asked. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes, like he was wearing a mask that didn't fit properly. But it wasn't normal. Nothing about Harold was normal. The way he moved, the way he smiled. The way he seemed to know exactly what every customer needed before they asked. And those hands, they never seemed to get dirty, no matter what job he was doing. Even at the mechanic shop, covered in grease stains, his actual skin looked clean and white. I decided to start taking pictures. Not of Harold directly, that seemed too obvious, but of the stores where he worked. I wanted proof that I wasn't going crazy. I snapped photos of him through windows, reflected in mirrors, caught in the background of other shots. The pictures came out strange, blurry in ways that didn't make sense. My phone worked perfectly fine everywhere else, but around Harold, the images became distorted. In most of them, Harold looked normal, but in a few there was something wrong with his proportions. His arms seemed too long, or his head seemed too small for his body. In one picture, taken at the dry cleaner, his reflection in the window showed a completely different person. Someone younger, with dark hair and normal eyes. When I zoomed in on the reflection, it disappeared entirely like it had never been there. I showed the pictures to my friend Mike, who'd lived in town his whole life. "Yeah, that's just Harold," he said, looking at the photos. "He's worked at practically every business in town at some point. Real dedicated worker." Mike squinted at one of the blurry pictures. Weird lighting in this one. Makes him look all stretched out. "Don't you think it's strange that he works everywhere?" I asked. Mike shrugged. "Small town, you know. People wear a lot of hats. My cousin works at 3 different places just to make ends meet. But Mike's cousin was young and needed multiple jobs. Harold looked like he was 70 years old, yet he worked more hours than any person I'd ever met. He never seemed tired, never took breaks, never called in sick. I started timing his appearances more carefully. I would see him at the grocery store at 9 a.m., then at the coffee shop at 9:15, then at the pharmacy at 9:30. Always punctual, always exactly where he needed to be. It was like he could predict when customers would arrive at each location, like he knew their schedules better than they did. The timing was too perfect. I started keeping a notebook, documenting every Harold sighting: date, time, location, uniform, name tag. The pattern that emerged was impossible. He was working 18-hour days, 7 days a week, at multiple locations simultaneously. No human being could maintain that kind of schedule, especially not someone who appeared to be in his 70s. One day, I followed him after his shift at the hardware store. I waited in my car until he left through the back door, then drove slowly behind him. He walked 3 blocks to a small house with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. The house sat at the end of a dead-end street, isolated from the other homes in the neighborhood. The house looked abandoned. The windows were boarded up, and weeds grew through cracks in the driveway. But I could see a faint light coming from somewhere inside, flickering like a candle. I sat in my car for 2 hours, waiting to see if he would come back out. He never did. The light continued to flicker, but there was no movement, no sound, no sign of life. The next morning, I drove past the house again. It looked exactly the same, abandoned, neglected, uninhabitable. The boards over the windows were warped with age, and the front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But at 8 a.m. sharp, Harold emerged from the front door, wearing a fresh uniform and carrying a small lunch bag. He walked to the bus stop and caught the 8:05 bus downtown. I followed the bus to the grocery store. Harold got off and walked inside, ready to start his shift. I watched him through the window, helping customers and stocking shelves. He moved with the same energy as always, like he'd gotten a full night's sleep in a comfortable bed. His uniform was crisp and clean, his name tag polished to a shine. But I'd seen where he lived. That house couldn't have electricity or running water. The windows were boarded up from the inside, and the front door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Yet somehow, Harold had walked out of it like it was perfectly normal, like he'd spent a comfortable night inside what was essentially a condemned building. I started having dreams about him. In the dreams, Harold was everywhere, not just at the stores, but in my house, in my car, in places where he had no business being. He would smile that too wide smile and say things like, "I work wherever I'm needed and have a blessed day." But in the dreams, his voice echoed like he was speaking from inside a cave. The dreams always ended the same way. Harold would reach out with those pale, thin hands and try to touch my face. His fingers would get closer and closer, and I could see that his nails were too long, too sharp. Right before his fingers made contact, I would wake up, gasping and sweating. The dreams felt more real than most of my waking hours. I decided to visit the house where Harold lived. I wanted to see it up close, to understand how someone could live in a place that looked uninhabitable. I waited until late afternoon, when I knew Harold would be working his evening shift at the pizza place. The house sat in the middle of an overgrown lot, surrounded by trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. The house was even worse than it looked from the street. The front porch sagged under the weight of rotting wood, and the steps creaked ominously when I climbed them. The front door was painted red, but most of the paint had chipped away, leaving behind bare wood that was gray with age. Up close, I could see that the boards over the windows were nailed in place from the inside. I knocked on the door, not expecting an answer. To my surprise, it swung open on its own. The hinges squealed like dying animals. Inside, the house was completely dark. I couldn't see anything beyond the threshold, even though it was still daylight outside. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from the doorway, creating a barrier between the outside world and whatever lay within. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed strangely, like the house was much bigger inside than it appeared from the outside. There was no answer, but I could hear something moving around in the darkness. Footsteps, maybe, or something being dragged across the floor. The sound was rhythmic, like someone pacing back and forth. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow hallway that stretched much farther than it should have. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floor was littered with debris. Old newspapers, broken glass, things I couldn't identify. The air smelled like dust and something else, something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. I took a step inside, then another. The floorboards groaned under my weight, but they held. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, longer than the house could possibly be. My footsteps echoed in the darkness, creating a strange harmony with the pacing sounds I'd heard earlier. The wallpaper depicted roses and vines, but in the flashlight beam, the pattern looked like twisted faces screaming. The hallway opened into a larger room. My flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The room was filled with uniforms, dozens of them, hanging from the ceiling like some kind of bizarre mobile. Grocery store uniforms, mechanic shop coveralls, pharmacy coats, pizza place aprons. All of them perfectly clean and pressed, all of them identical except for the name tags. Harold, Henry, Herbert, Hugo, Hamilton, Harris, Harvey, Howard, Harry, Hank, Hugh. Every variation of his name was represented. The name tags glinted in my flashlight beam like small mirrors, and in the center of the room, standing perfectly still, was Harold himself. But this wasn't the Harold I'd seen at the stores. This Harold was different. He wasn't wearing any of the uniforms. Instead, he was dressed in a plain white shirt and dark pants. that looked like they'd been tailored for someone with different proportions. The shirt was too tight across his chest, and the pants were too short, showing pale ankles above worn dress shoes. His skin was even paler than usual, almost translucent in the flashlight beam. "You're curious about my work," he said, his voice echoing in the strange space. "That's admirable. Most people don't pay attention to the help." His smile was the same as always, but in the darkness, lit only by my phone's flashlight, it looked hungry. His teeth caught the light, reflecting it back like small shards of glass. "How do you do it?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "How do you work at every store in town?" Harold tilted his head, considering my question. The movement was too fluid, too graceful for someone his age. "I work wherever I'm needed," he said, the same answer he'd given before. "People need help, and I provide it." "But you can't be in multiple places at once," I said. "It's impossible." Harold's smile widened, showing more of those two sharp teeth. "Is it? You've seen me do it. You've documented it. You've followed me. What's impossible about something you've witnessed with your own eyes?" His voice had taken on that oily quality again, like he was speaking through water. I took a step backward, but my foot caught on something. I looked down and saw the floor was covered in small white objects. Teeth, I realized with growing horror. Human teeth, scattered across the wooden planks, like scattered rice after a wedding. Some were still attached to fragments of jawbone. Others were loose, rolling slightly when I stepped on them. "The people in this town are very grateful for my service," Harold continued, his voice taking on that oily quality I'd noticed at the mechanic shop. "They appreciate reliability, punctuality, a friendly face at every business they visit." He gestured to the uniforms hanging above us. "I've been serving this community for a very long time." "How long?" I whispered. Harold's penny-colored eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. "Since before you were born. Since before your parents were born. Since before this town had a name." He took a step toward me, and I noticed his feet didn't make any sound on the floor covered in teeth. He moved like he was floating just above the surface. "I remember when the first trading post was built where the grocery store stands now. I remember when the blacksmith shop became the hardware store. I remember when the saloon became the coffee shop." With each sentence, he took another silent step closer. "I've been helping people for over a century, young man, and I'll continue helping long after you're gone." The flashlight beam wavered in my shaking hand. Harold's face kept shifting in the light, sometimes looking like the familiar store employee, sometimes showing glimpses of something else underneath. Something older, hungrier, more predatory. His eyes never changed, though. They remained that same penny color, ancient and knowing. "What are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Harold's smile grew impossibly wide. "I'm exactly what I appear to be. A helpful employee, a dedicated worker, someone who takes pride in customer service." He paused, his head tilting at an unnatural angle. "The question isn't what I am. The question is what I do with customers who become too curious." I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard Harold's laughter echoing through the house, bouncing off the walls and following me down the hallway. The sound multiplied, like there were multiple voices laughing in harmony. I burst through the front door and stumbled down the rotting porch steps, my phone's flashlight beam swinging wildly as I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. When I finally started the engine, I looked back at the house. It was dark again, looking abandoned and empty. But I could see Harold's silhouette in one of the boarded-up windows, watching me drive away. He was still smiling. The next morning, I went to the grocery store, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Harold was just an old man who worked multiple jobs. There had to be a logical explanation for what I'd seen. Maybe the house belonged to someone else, and Harold had been visiting. Maybe the uniforms were costumes for a community theater production. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. But Harold was there, working the morning shift with the same energy as always. When he saw me, his smile seemed wider than usual. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly quality. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" He bagged my groceries with practiced efficiency, his pale hands moving with mechanical precision. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Very beautiful." Harold's penny-colored eyes fixed on mine. "I hope you slept well," he said. "Sometimes new experiences can be unsettling." The way he said unsettling made my skin crawl. He knew. He knew I'd been to his house, seen his collection of uniforms, discovered his secret. I grabbed my bags and left quickly, but I could feel his eyes following me all the way to the parking lot. When I got to my car, I looked back through the store window. Harold was helping another customer, smiling and chatting like nothing had happened. But when the customer turned away, Harold's eyes found mine again. He mouthed the words, "Have a blessed day," and winked. That afternoon, I went to the bank to withdraw money for my escape. I was planning to leave town immediately, to put as much distance between myself and Harold as possible. But when I walked into the bank, Harold was there too, working as a teller. His name tag read Harrison, and he wore the standard bank uniform like he'd been working there for years. "What can I help you with today?" he asked, his smile as unsettling as ever. My mouth went dry. How could he be here? I'd just seen him at the grocery store 3 hours ago. There was no way he could have changed jobs, changed uniforms, and started working at the bank in the same day. I need to make a withdrawal," I stammered. Harold's fingers danced across the keyboard with practiced ease. "Of course. How much would you like to withdraw?" His voice was professionally pleasant, but there was something underneath it, something that sounded like amusement. "Everything," I said. "I want to close my account." Harold's smile flickered for just a moment. "Moving away?" he asked. "That's a shame. This is such a nice town. Very stable. People here tend to stay put." He processed my withdrawal with efficient movements, counting out bills with those pale, thin fingers. "Here you are," he said, sliding the money across the counter. "I do hope you'll reconsider leaving. The town needs people like you, observant people, curious people." The way he said curious made it sound like a disease. We don't get many visitors who pay such close attention to local business practices. I took the money and left without another word. But as I walked to my car, I could hear Harold's laughter following me through the bank's glass doors. It was the same laugh I'd heard in his house, multiplied and echoing. Other customers in the bank seemed oblivious to the sound, going about their business like nothing was wrong. I drove straight home and started packing. I threw clothes into suitcases, grabbed important documents, and loaded everything into my car. I was going to drive until I ran out of gas, then find a new town, a new life, a new identity. Somewhere Harold couldn't follow me. But as I was loading the last of my belongings, I heard a knock at my door. I froze, my hands full of boxes. The knock came again, patient and persistent. I set down the boxes and approached the door slowly. Through the peephole, I could see Harold standing on my porch, wearing casual clothes I'd never seen before. "I know you're in there," he said, his voice muffled by the door. "We need to talk." I didn't answer, hoping he would go away. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "I can wait," Harold said. "I'm very patient. I've had a lot of practice." I backed away from the door, my heart racing. Harold couldn't be here. He was supposed to be at work, at one of his many jobs. It was the middle of the day, and every business in town would be open. How could he have time to visit me at home? The knocking stopped. For a moment, I thought he'd given up and left. Then I heard footsteps on the roof, slow and deliberate. Harold was walking across my roof, his feet making soft tapping sounds on the shingles. The footsteps moved from the front of the house to the back, then stopped directly above my bedroom. I grabbed my car keys and ran for the back door. But when I opened it, Harold was standing there, smiling that too wide smile. He'd somehow gotten down from the roof and positioned himself perfectly to intercept my escape. His casual clothes were clean and unwrinkled, like he'd just put them on. "Going somewhere?" he asked. "That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could have a conversation about your employment situation." He stepped closer, and I noticed his shadow fell in the wrong direction, despite the afternoon sun. "You see, I think you'd make an excellent addition to our local workforce." "I don't want a job," I said, backing into my kitchen. "I'm leaving town." Harold followed me inside, uninvited. "Oh, but you misunderstand," he said, his voice taking on that oily quality. "This isn't about what you want. This is about what the town needs. And the town needs dedicated employees, reliable workers, people who understand the value of good customer service." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a name tag. It was blank, waiting for a name to be added. "I've been watching you," Harold said. "You're very observant, very thorough. You'd be perfect for management positions." The way he said management made it sound like a threat. "I'm not interested," I said, still backing away. Harold's smile never wavered. "Interest is irrelevant," he said. "Duty is what matters. Service is what counts. And everyone in this town serves in their own way." He held up the blank name tag. "What name would you like to use?" "Something starting with H would be appropriate." I turned and ran for the front door. Harold's laughter followed me, echoing through my house like it had echoed through his. But this time, the laughter was coming from multiple directions. From the kitchen, from the living room, from upstairs. Like there were multiple Harolds spread throughout my home. I burst through the front door and ran to my car. The engine started on the first try, and I floored the accelerator, speeding away from my house as fast as I could. In the rearview mirror, I could see Harold standing in my doorway, still holding that blank name tag. He waved goodbye like an old friend. I drove for hours, stopping only for gas and food. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get as far away from Harold as possible. I drove through 3 states before finally stopping at a motel in a small town I'd never heard of. The clerk at the front desk was a young woman with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "Welcome to Millbrook," she said, handing me a room key. "I hope you enjoy your stay." I thanked her and went to my room, finally allowing myself to relax. I'd escaped. I'd gotten away from Harold and his impossible existence. I was free, but that night, I had the dreams again. Harold was everywhere. In my motel room, in the parking lot, in places that didn't exist. He was wearing different uniforms, different name tags, but always the same face. Always the same smile. And he kept saying the same things. I work wherever I'm needed, and have a blessed day. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. It was just a dream, I told myself. Harold was hundreds of miles away, back in my old town. He couldn't follow me here. He couldn't be everywhere at once. But as I looked out the motel window, I saw a familiar silhouette walking across the parking lot. Harold was here. I packed my things and left immediately, driving deeper into the night. I didn't stop again until I reached another town, then another. Each time I thought I'd escaped. Each time Harold appeared within days, working at local businesses, wearing different uniforms, using different names, but always the same face, always the same smile. I realized that Harold wasn't confined to my old town. He was everywhere, in every community, serving every customer. He was part of something bigger, something that transcended geography and logic. He was the helpful employee who never took breaks, never called in sick, never asked for raises or benefits. He was the perfect worker, and he was everywhere. I've been running for 6 months now, staying in different towns, never remaining in one place for more than a few days. But Harold always finds me. Sometimes he's working at the gas station where I stop for fuel. Sometimes he's at the restaurant where I eat dinner. Sometimes he's at the motel where I try to sleep. He never approaches me directly anymore. He just smiles and does his job, providing excellent customer service to everyone who needs it. But I can feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. And I know that someday I'll stop running. Someday I'll be too tired to keep moving. And when that day comes, Harold will be there, holding a blank name tag, ready to welcome me into his workforce. Last week, I was at a new grocery store in my new town. The cashier was a young woman with kind eyes and a genuine smile. She bagged my items carefully and wished me well. As I was leaving, I heard her helping the next customer, and something about her voice made me turn around. She was smiling that same too wide smile, showing just slightly too many teeth. Her eyes had changed color. They were the same penny brown as Harold's. And when she looked at me through the store window, she mouthed the words, "I work wherever I'm needed." I dropped my groceries and ran to my car. In the rearview mirror, I could see her standing in the doorway of the store, still smiling, still watching. The name tag on her uniform read, Helen. Harold had found a way to expand his workforce, to recruit others into his impossible existence. I'm writing this story as a warning. If you ever find yourself in a town where the same person seems to work at every business, where one employee appears in multiple places at impossible times, don't investigate. Don't follow them home. Don't try to understand what they are or how they do what they do. Just leave. Pack your things and drive away as fast as you can. Because some types of customer service come with a price that's higher than you're willing to pay. And some employees never clock out, never take a break, never stop working. They just keep smiling and asking how they can help you. Even when you realize you don't want their help at all, they keep expanding their workforce, recruiting new employees into their impossible existence. And once you've caught their attention, once you've shown too much curiosity about their methods, you become a candidate for employment yourself. The worst part is that I'm starting to understand the appeal. The stability, the purpose, the sense of being needed everywhere you go. Sometimes when I'm driving through yet another unfamiliar town, I find myself wondering what it would be like to stop running, to accept Harold's offer, to put on one of those uniforms and serve customers with that same dedicated smile. But then I remember the teeth scattered across his floor, the uniforms hanging from his ceiling, the way his laughter echoed through that impossible house. And I keep driving, Keep running, keep hoping that someday I'll find a place where Harold can't follow. But deep down, I know the truth. Harold is everywhere because he needs to be everywhere. He's the employee who never complains, never demands better working conditions, never asks for time off. He's the perfect worker in an imperfect world. And perfect workers are always in demand. So I'll keep running, keep moving, keep trying to stay one step ahead of Harold and his expanding workforce. But I know that eventually I'll get tired. I'll make a mistake. I'll let my guard down. And when that happens, Harold will be there, holding a name tag with my name on it, ready to welcome me into his family of dedicated employees. Until then, I'll keep writing these warnings, hoping that someone will listen, hoping that someone will learn from my mistakes, hoping that someone will recognize the signs before it's too late. Because Harold is out there, working wherever he's needed, and he's always hiring.